From the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 16, verses 1 to 8. At that time, Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and he was accused before him of wasting his possessions. He called him and said, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking away my management? To dig I am not strong enough. To beg I am ashamed. So I know what to do, so that when I am removed from management, there will be someone to welcome me into their home.' He called in each of his master's debtors and said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' The man replied, 100 barrels of oil. He said to him, 'Take your receipt, sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'How much do you owe?' He replied, 100 measures of wheat. He said, 'Take your receipt and write 80. The master commended that dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. The children of this world, in fact, are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the children of light. Paul of the Lord. Good day. Today we will also decide to stay with Jesus at his feet, to learn from him the art of love and the art of life. Here, today, Jesus. Who is he addressing? He is addressing the disciples. He is addressing me, you. He is addressing someone among us who follows him, and he speaks to us with a rather particular parable. And he says, "There was a rich man who had an administrator, and he was accused before him of wasting his possessions." In itself, the Lord is the only rich person, to whom the earth and all that it contains, the universe and its inhabitants, belong, as stated in Psalm 24, verse 1. Behold, this rich man had an administrator. And what is it called to be an administrator? To administer means to take care of, to govern a public or private affair, one's own, or someone else's. To take care means to work for others. In this particular case, this administrator had certainly received from the master, who indeed knew him very well, the management of his goods. The master had placed all his trust in him, had put all his goods in his hands, with the desire that he not only would not squander them, but would make them fruitful. Clearly, these goods, even though placed in the hands of the manager, continue to belong to the master. In itself, I, you, all of us before God are simply managers. St. Paul tells us in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4, verse 7, "What do you have that you did not receive? And if you have not received, why do you boast as if you had not received? Everything we have is not ours, it is God's." Our gifts, our virtues, our talents, our very life, are not mine. I cannot claim them as my own. God has lent them to me, and later I will have to return them. The manager must be in full communion with the master. He is called to act according to the will of his master, and so we are also called to be in full communion with God, who has called us to manage his goods. We are called to act according to the will of him, with a capital H, who wants us to be like him. We are called to act according to the will of the Father who gives us everything, not to accumulate his gifts, no, but so that we can share what he gives us with our brothers, with those in need. But what is the greatest temptation? It is to take possession of what is not ours. It is to take possession of what does not belong to us. It is like John. Well, we should be able to say, "I came out of my mother's womb naked, and I will return there naked. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And so it is. We were born naked, then little by little we covered ourselves. Sometimes we enrich ourselves, thinking we are important for those things that adorn our lives. But as we were born naked, we will return naked to the Father. We came into the world with nothing. We will return to God with nothing material. And the great temptation is to take possession of things that do not belong to us. And by doing so, no, we not only do not take possession of things, but we allow things to take possession of us. And by doing so, We do not even embrace our being creatures, our being weak, fragile, dependent on everything, on everyone, and on God. And by not doing so, by acting in this way, we even desire to put ourselves in the place of God. And in this way, we risk removing God from our lives and denying the truth of his being, Creator and Lord of my life, of everyone's life. By doing this, we also deny the truth of everything that he has placed in our hands, and that is his gift to us. In itself, we are filled with God's gifts, and we do not realize it. We realize the gift when the Lord takes it away from us. And someone says, we were happy, and we didn't know it. And if I fall into this temptation, I fall into atheism. Me, an atheist. Yes, atheist. I become an atheist. I become without God in a practical way. Mentally, I say that I believe in God, and we all believe in God. Oh, many people tell me, yes, I am a Christian, but not practicing. And good for you. If you do not practice the encounter with God, you are a practical atheist. Hey, 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 hey. Practically in everything we do not put God at the center. And who do we put at the center? We put ourselves, we put work, we put the things we like, and we risk taking ownership of everything that God has placed in our hands. Or rather, we make it so that the things the Lord has placed in our hands become our idol. And we say, this is mine. It's trouble if someone touches it. It's trouble even if God touches it. And this is called practical atheism. Some call it the principle of decreation. That is, a principle that separates life from its source. It is terrible. And we risk all falling into it like rotten fruits. And if we fall into it, the other, the prince of this world, comes and reigns. Behold, this steward was accused before God, before the master, of squandering his possessions. This means that someone sees his wrong way of operating and brings to light what he was doing with the goods that had been entrusted to him by the master, goods that did not belong to him. And he, instead, was squandering them rather than using them according to the master's will. And what does the master do? He called him and said, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, for you can no longer be steward." Beautiful? That is, the master is just. The master hears one side of the story, so to speak, but wants to hear the other as well. And then he asks this steward what he hears being said about him. As it is right to ask for an account of his administration, he asks him about the goods that I have placed in your hands. The master's trust in the steward was so great that he did not feel the need to demand it beforehand. And then he tells him what he has said, because if all the accusations are true, then you will no longer be able to manage, that is, I will take my goods out of your hands, and you will have no more work. Wow! And the steward said to himself, "What will I do now that my master is taking away my administration? It seems I don't have the strength. I am ashamed to beg, so what should I do? Because when I am removed from the administration, there will be someone to welcome me into their house." That is, faced with the need to account for what he has done, the administrator realizes that he has acted poorly, that he has truly taken possession of the master's goods, and moreover, that he has especially squandered them. He is about to lose the job that ensured his livelihood, and what does he think? What does he do? He says, "I don't have the strength to dig. I have always relied on the wealth of others. I have always relied on my master's wealth. I can't walk on my own. I'm not used to it any more. I don't have the strength. I can't do it. I am ashamed to beg. I am ashamed to be a creature. Who is the creature, in fact? It is a beggar being, and we realize that we are. interdependent and especially dependent on the one with a capital C who created us. And the fact that I realize my creatureliness helps me understand this as well. What does this administrator do? He is ashamed of having to depend on God. He is ashamed of having to depend on others. He is ashamed of not being self-sufficient. He is ashamed of being a creature. And it seems that the Lord is telling us, come on, just be yourself. That is God himself, who is the absolute, who is the infinite, who is omnipotent, became a creature, became small, became needy to tell us you want to meet with me, but welcome me in your creatureliness, in your fragility, welcome me in your weakness because I am in you. And then, so what can be done? Wow, this administrator has found a solution. I know what to do, because when I am removed from the administration, there will be someone who welcomes me into their home. I know what to do. Very interesting, because the knowledge of what the Father has done with the administrator becomes the principle of his action with the brothers. And think about how God has dealt with me. I do the same with others. That is, I am called to become merciful to myself, like God. And then, so what does the administrator think? When I am removed from the administration, what can I do so that there is someone who welcomes me into their home? That is, the present action, what I do in my here and now, becomes the foundation of my future. Why? When I have been removed from the administration, there should be someone who will welcome me into their home, and so I must act now. Why? Because of what he is thinking might happen. And what do I do? Says the administrator. His desire is clearly to continue living. And one can only live to the extent that they are welcomed into the home, welcomed into the lives of others. I can only live to the extent that I am loved by others. And this is one of the fundamental needs of a person, to be loved and to love. How important it is to find refuge in brothers. And how can I do it? Thinks the administrator. Then he called the master's debtors one by one and said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" He replied, 100 barrels of oil. He said to him, "Take your receipt, sit down immediately and write 50. Wow! I mean, this man, the administrator, knew all those who had a debt with the Lord, and he calls them one by one as we heard. He said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" Because the debt is never with us, but always with the master. The debt is always with God, because everything belongs to God. Everything is his. And he asks him, "How much do you owe my master?" The man replied, 100 barrels of oil. Wow! The administrator knows that the Father gives and forgives everything, because he brings out the sun and the rain for the good and for the bad, as we find in chapter 6, verse 35. And so this administrator who has been with the master for so many years, what does he do? Well, knowing the master, he does what God would have done. He does the same, aware that with the measure he uses, it will be measured to him in return, knowing that only the Father gives everything, that only the Father forgives everything. And so we are also able to imitate him according to the measure of grace we have received. But the important thing, the crucial thing, is to start entering this circle of grace. And this also applies to spiritual goods, material goods. And then, entering this circle of grace, something new is born in this administrator. And what does he say? He said to him, "Take your receipt quickly. Write down 50. Wow! There is no time to waste in this act of mercy that reconnects us to the Father, because it allows us to love as he loves. And not only does it reconnect us to the Father, but it also reconnects us to our brothers by forgiving and canceling their debts. That is, to earn our future, there is nothing but the present. That is, I try to do what the Father would do, and therefore I forgive and cancel. Lower, lower what you have to give to my master, please." And then he said to another, "How much do you owe?" He answered, 100 wheat measures. And he said to him, "Take your receipt and write 80. And so he did the same with the others. Wow! And the master. The master praised that dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Very interesting, because what does the master do? Instead of punishing the administrator for not making the right calculations, and because he was still, in quotes, taking away goods from him, no. The dishonest administrator gives them. Why? Because he gives